My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. Last Saturday, I stood in a room filled with flowers, soft music, and the joyful chatter of my dearest friends. My fiancé, Michael, was by my side, his hand holding mine as we celebrated our engagement. But as I scanned the crowd, a painful reality settled in. The 3 chairs we had saved at the front table were empty. The family I had financially and emotionally supported for 5 long years, the family of my late fiancé, Mark, hadn't come. They had collectively decided to boycott the happiest moment I'd had since his death. What they didn't know was that their cruel absence was the final key that unlocked my gilded cage, and that the secret I was keeping wasn't just my newfound happiness, but a $10 million fortune that was about to change everything. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're viewing from, so drop a comment below. And before I tell you how this one night of betrayal unraveled 5 years of sacrifice, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories about loyalty, loss, and the moment you finally realize your own worth. Before Michael, my life was defined by Mark. We met in college. He was a brilliant, chaotic coder with a mind that moved a million miles a minute, and I was the quiet graphic design student who found beauty in order and structure. We were a perfect balance. His dream was to build a tech startup that would change the world. My dream was to build a life with him. We were inseparable for 7 years. We bought a charming little craftsman house in a quiet suburb, pouring our meager savings and all our free time into making it our own. His family, his widowed mother, Eleanor, and his younger sister, Sophia, were a constant presence. I tried so hard to win them over, hosting Sunday dinners, remembering birthdays, and designing their Christmas cards for free. Then, 5 years ago, the unthinkable happened. A drunk driver ran a red light, and Mark was gone in an instant. The world didn't just go gray, it ceased to exist. At his funeral, a grief-stricken Eleanor clutched my hand and whispered, "You were the love of his life, Clara. You have to promise me you'll look after us now. It's what he would have wanted." In my fog of sorrow, I nodded. I promised. It was a promise that would come to define the next half-decade of my life. That promise quickly morphed into an unspoken contract. I was no longer Clara, the grieving fiancée. I became the family's caretaker, their financial backstop, their emotional anchor. The house that Mark and I had bought together, the one filled with our shared dreams, became their house. They moved in temporarily after the funeral, a temporary stay that never ended. I continued to pay the mortgage and all the bills from my salary as a freelance graphic designer. At first, it felt right. We were a family, bound by our shared loss. But slowly, insidiously, the dynamic shifted. My role as a beloved partner was replaced by that of a dutiful provider. The demands started small. Sophia, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, needed money for a photography course that turned out to be a weekend trip to a music festival. I paid for it, telling myself she was just young and finding her way. Then Eleanor's car needed a major repair. Mark always handled these things. She'd sighed, looking at me expectantly. I drained my savings account to cover the bill. My life became a series of carefully managed budgets, not for my own future, but to maintain their comfort. Their gratitude was fleeting, replaced by a sense of entitlement. My contributions were no longer seen as acts of love, but as my duty. I was living in a single room of a house I paid for, while they occupied the rest. The narrative they spun for the wider family was that I was a lost, grieving soul, and they had graciously taken me in. The truth was the exact opposite. I was their host, their landlord, and their ATM all rolled into one. I remember one Christmas, 2 years after Mark died. I had worked around the clock on a huge project to save up enough money to buy them truly thoughtful gifts. I bought Eleanor a beautiful cashmere sweater she'd been admiring, and Sophia a new laptop for her endless string of online ventures. My gift from them was a generic, scented candle, the kind you buy at a drugstore checkout. Later that evening, I overheard Sophia on the phone with a friend. "Yeah? Clara got me a new MacBook. It's the least she could do, honestly. It's not like she has anyone else to spend her money on." The comment stung more than I let on. It was a stark reminder of my place. I wasn't family. I was a resource. I existed to serve the memory of their son and brother, and that service was measured in dollars and cents. I told myself their grief made them cruel, that they didn't really mean it. I kept working, kept giving, kept hoping that one day they would see me again, not just the role I filled. I thought that by pouring everything I had into them, I could somehow keep a piece of Mark alive, that I could earn a permanent place in their hearts. But as I would soon discover, their hearts had no room for me, and the arrival of a new love in my life would expose that truth in the most devastating way possible. For nearly 5 years, my life was a quiet, gray routine of work, obligation, and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. I had resigned myself to this life, believing it was my penance for surviving when Mark hadn't. Then, I met Michael. He was a client at first, an architect who needed a logo for his new firm. Our initial meetings were strictly professional, but I found myself looking forward to them. He was kind, patient, and he saw things in my work and in me that I hadn't let myself see in years. He saw talent, not just a service provider. He saw a woman, not just a widow. Our first date was terrifying. I felt a tidal wave of guilt, as if I were cheating on Mark. But Michael was gentle. He never pushed. He let me talk about Mark, about my grief, about the complicated situation with Eleanor and Sophia. "It sounds like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders," he said one evening, his expression full of a compassion I hadn't realized I was starving for. "You deserve to have someone help you carry it." Slowly, carefully, he helped me rebuild. He reminded me that I was more than just Mark's fiancée, more than just a caretaker. I was Clara, a talented designer, a funny, warm person who deserved happiness. For the first time since the accident, I started to feel glimmers of light breaking through the fog. After a year of dating, Michael proposed. It was on a trip to the coast, a place Mark and I had never gone. It was intentional, a way to create a new memory that was solely ours. He got down on one knee as the sun set over the ocean, with a ring that was simple, elegant, and so perfectly me. As I said yes, tears streamed down my face, not tears of sadness or guilt, but of overwhelming, unadulterated joy. A chapter of my life I thought was permanently closed had just begun a new, beautiful sequel. My friends were ecstatic. My best friend, Sarah, who had watched me wither for 5 years, cried with relief. "It's about time, Clara," she said, hugging me tight. "It's about time you chose yourself." Telling Eleanor and Sophia was a different story. I knew it would be difficult, so I chose to do it in person, hoping they could see the genuine happiness in my eyes. I invited them out for lunch at their favorite restaurant. My treat, of course. After we ordered, I took a deep breath and shared my news, holding out my hand to show them the ring. The reaction was not what I had hoped for, but exactly what I should have expected. There was no joy, no congratulations, just a cold, heavy silence. Eleanor put down her fork and stared at me, her face a mask of disappointment. "Engaged?" she said, the word dripping with judgment. "That was fast." "Eleanor, it's been 5 years," I said gently. "5 years is nothing when you've lost the love of your life," she retorted, as if my love for Mark was something she could measure and find wanting. Sophia was even worse. She didn't even look at the ring. She just shook her head, a smirk playing on her lips. Wow. I guess some people really can just replace a person like they're upgrading their phone. I hope this Michael guy knows he's living in a house my brother paid for, in a life my brother built. The accusation was breathtakingly unfair. Mark hadn't paid for the house, we had, and I was the one who had continued to pay for it single-handedly for 5 years. But pointing that out felt petty. I tried to steer the conversation back to a positive place. "I'm not replacing Mark. No one could ever do that. I'm just trying to be happy again. I hoped you would be happy for me." Eleanor dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin, a perfect performance of wounded grief. "How can we be happy, Clara? It feels like you're erasing him. You're erasing our son." The lunch ended with them giving me the cold shoulder, making it clear that my happiness was an inconvenience, a betrayal. I drove home feeling a familiar knot of guilt and frustration in my stomach. Their coldness was a stark warning. a clear signal that they saw my new life not as a celebration, but as a threat to their comfortable existence. But I was still naive. I still believed that if I could just make them understand, if I could show them that my moving on didn't mean abandoning them, they would eventually come around. I had no idea that their disapproval was just the opening salvo in a calculated war to keep me exactly where they wanted me, under their control. In the weeks following my engagement announcement, the atmosphere in the house shifted from passively dismissive to actively hostile. My happiness was a poison they were determined to purge. They launched a subtle but relentless campaign of psychological warfare, designed to make me feel guilty, disloyal, and ultimately, to break off my engagement with Michael. Their tactics were varied, but their goal was singular: to reassert their control over my life and my finances. The first incident was centered on the engagement ring itself. A few days after our disastrous lunch, Eleanor approached me in the kitchen while I was washing dishes. Her eyes, which could look so warm when she wanted something, were now cold and assessing. "Let me see that again," she said, gesturing to my hand. I held it out, and she examined the simple, beautiful diamond Michael had chosen. She pursed her lips. "It's very minimalist," she said, the word landing like an insult. "You know, the ring Mark was designing for you before. It was a classic three-stone setting. Timeless. He had such impeccable taste. Every word was a carefully sharpened dart, a comparison designed to make Michael's thoughtful gift feel inadequate, to frame him as a lesser man than her son." I pulled my hand back, my joy dimming slightly under her critical gaze. "I love it," I said quietly. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Next came the party planning. I genuinely wanted them to be a part of it. They were, for all intents and purposes, the only family I had left. I bought a beautiful planner and sat them down one evening, hoping to discuss venues and guest lists. "I'd love for you both to be involved," I said, my voice full of a hope I didn't feel. "Perhaps you could help me choose the flowers, Eleanor. You've always had such a wonderful eye." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Clara, don't be ridiculous. How can you expect us to celebrate you replacing our brother? The very thought is just too painful." She looked at Sophia for support, who eagerly jumped in. "Honestly, it's a bit tacky to have a big party, don't you think? It makes it seem like you weren't that sad about Mark at all." So, my attempt to include them was twisted into an accusation of my own insensitivity. They weren't just refusing to participate, they were actively shaming me for even wanting to celebrate. I was being selfish for wanting to be happy. I was being cruel for moving on. The conversation ended with me apologizing for hurting their feelings, a bizarre outcome that left me feeling confused and angry. The financial pressure escalated a week later. Sophia's ancient car, which I had already paid to fix twice before, finally gave out. She called me in a panic, claiming she was stranded. When I arrived, she launched into a tearful tirade about how unfair her life was. The tirade concluded, as it always did, with a request for money. "The mechanic says it's going to be at least $3,000 for a new transmission," she wailed. "I don't have that kind of money, Clara. What am I supposed to do?" I hesitated. $3,000 was a huge amount, and I was trying to save for the wedding. "Sophia, I can help you look for a more reliable used car. Maybe we can work out a budget." Her tears immediately dried up, replaced by cold fury. "A budget? Are you kidding me? My brother is dead, and you're talking about a budget? This is exactly the kind of thing Mark would have handled in a second. The very last thing he would want is for his little sister to be unsafe because his fiancé was too cheap to help." The emotional blackmail was suffocating. She was using their dead brother as a weapon to get what she wanted. Exhausted and worn down, I gave in. I transferred the money, feeling sick to my stomach. I was paying for the privilege of being treated like dirt. My role was clear. I was to fund their lives, no questions asked, while putting my own on an indefinite hold. The most insidious act, however, was the one I discovered by accident. I had sent out the engagement party invitations, beautiful cards I had designed myself. A week later, I ran into Mark's aunt, Patricia, at the grocery store. She was always kind to me. "Clara, darling, congratulations. she said, giving me a warm hug. I was so thrilled to hear your news, but I'm a little confused. Eleanor told me the party was a very small private affair, just for your friends, and that the family wasn't really invited so as not to make things awkward. I stared at her, my blood running cold. What? That's not true at all, Patricia. I sent invitations to the entire family. I was hoping you would all be there. Patricia's face fell as she realized what had happened. Oh, dear. It seems there's been some miscommunication. Eleanor called several of us. She said you were trying to be respectful of Mark's memory by keeping it low-key, and that you'd be having a separate, quiet dinner with the family later on. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was deliberate sabotage. Eleanor was actively campaigning behind my back, lying to our relatives to ensure my party would be empty of family, to isolate me and reinforce her narrative that I was disrespecting them. She wanted to create the image of me, alone with my new friends, having cast aside the grieving family. That night, I tried to have one last, honest conversation. I sat Eleanor and Sophia down in the living room, my living room. I know you've been telling the family not to come to the party, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I need to understand why you would do that. Eleanor didn't even have the grace to look guilty. She adopted her most patronizing tone. Clara, you're being overly sensitive. We were simply trying to protect you from gossip, to manage a delicate situation. You can't possibly understand the complexities of our family's grief. It was classic gaslighting. My valid feelings were dismissed as being oversensitive. Her malicious actions were reframed as a protective measure. I was the crazy one for being upset. The conversation went nowhere. I left feeling more defeated than ever. That weekend, I met my best friend Sarah for coffee and poured out the entire sordid story. She listened patiently, her expression growing harder with each detail I recounted. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. Clara, listen to me, she said, her voice firm. This has nothing to do with Mark's memory. They are not grieving, they are terrified. For 5 years you have been their safety net, their live-in ATM. This engagement isn't a betrayal to Mark. It's a threat to their lifestyle. They will do anything to sabotage your happiness because they are terrified of losing their meal ticket. This isn't grief. It's a calculated campaign of emotional and financial abuse. Sarah's words cut through the fog of guilt and confusion. Hearing an outsider articulate the situation so clearly was a brutal but necessary wake-up call. For the first time, I saw their actions not as the messy expressions of sorrow, but as a deliberate, strategic effort to keep me trapped. I finally understood that I wasn't dealing with a grieving family who needed my compassion. I was dealing with manipulators who required my compliance. And their final move was about to prove Sarah right in the most cruel and public way imaginable. The day of the engagement party arrived, cloaked in a sense of impending doom. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my heart. Michael, sensing my anxiety, was a rock of calm support. Whatever happens today, we face it together, he whispered, kissing my forehead as we finished setting up the decorations in our backyard. Our friends had transformed it into a fairy tale setting with strings of fairy lights, bouquets of my favorite peonies, and tables draped in crisp white linen. It was beautiful, a perfect reflection of the new beginning I so desperately craved. Yet, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach with every passing hour. I had sent Eleanor and Sophia a final, hopeful text that morning. The party starts at 4. We've saved you seats at the front. It would mean the world to me if you were there. Silence. No reply. As guests began to arrive, a parade of smiling, happy faces, I plastered on a smile of my own. I hugged friends, accepted their heartfelt congratulations, and introduced them to Michael's wonderful family, who had welcomed me with open arms. But my eyes kept straying to the driveway, hoping to see Eleanor's familiar sedan pull up. I still held on to a sliver of hope that they would choose love over control, that they would see me standing there happy and in love, and realize that this was something to be celebrated, not condemned. The hope was a fool's errand. At 3:55 p.m., just 5 minutes before the party was officially set to begin, my phone buzzed. It was a group text message from Eleanor, with Sophia included. My heart leaped for a second. thinking it might be an on our way message. What I read instead was a declaration of war, delivered with the cold, sterile precision of a corporate memo. The message read, "Clara, after much careful consideration, Sophia and I have decided that we cannot, in good conscience, attend this event. Your decision to move forward so publicly is a profound betrayal of Mark's memory, and we cannot participate in it. We will be spending this evening together as a family, quietly honoring the memory of our beloved son and brother. We trust you will understand your place in this matter and respect our decision." I read it once, then twice. The words blurred through a sudden film of tears. Each phrase was a calculated blow. Cannot in good conscience, painting their cruelty as a moral stance. Profound betrayal, the final damning judgment on my character. Honoring our son, implying my celebration was a desecration. And the final crushing line, "We trust you will understand your place." My place. For 5 years, my place had been to write the checks. My place was to be the silent, grieving caretaker. My place was to serve their needs while suppressing my own. And now, by choosing happiness, I had stepped out of my place, and this was my punishment. It was a public shunning, a final, unequivocal statement that I was not, and had never been, one of them. I was an asset, and I was no longer performing my function. Michael found me moments later, standing frozen by the drink table, my phone clutched in my hand. He saw the look on my face and knew instantly. "They're not coming, are they?" he asked softly. I shook my head, unable to speak. He gently took the phone from my hand and read the message. A flash of pure fury crossed his face before he composed himself for my sake. He wrapped his arms around me. "I am so sorry, my love," he whispered into my hair. "You don't deserve this. They don't deserve you." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The deep, aching hurt was still there, but a new feeling began to rise from the ashes of my hope. A cold, hard, crystalline rage. Sarah was right. My therapist was right. Michael was right. This wasn't about grief. This was a power play, and they had just made their final, unforgivable move. They hadn't just declined an invitation. They had tried to publicly humiliate me, to ruin what was supposed to be a joyous celebration of my future. I pulled back from Michael's embrace and wiped my eyes, my hand no longer shaking. I looked out at the party, at the faces of the people who truly loved me, who had shown up to celebrate my happiness without condition. Then I looked at the 3 empty chairs at the front table, each one a monument to 5 years of misplaced loyalty. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and clear, devoid of the tremor it had held just moments before. "They don't deserve me." I took a deep, shuddering breath, not of sorrow, but of release. "And you know what, Michael? They're not coming here tonight. It's the greatest engagement gift they could have possibly given me." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. He saw the shift, the steel that had replaced the sorrow. As I looked at those empty chairs, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt the liberating fire of fury, and I realized with a chilling certainty that Eleanor and Sophia had no idea who they had just declared war on. They thought they were punishing a weak, dependent woman. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The rest of the engagement party was a blur of feigned normalcy. I smiled, I laughed, I toasted to my future with Michael. I let myself be enveloped by the genuine love of our friends, using their warmth as a shield against the cold void left by Eleanor and Sophia. But beneath the surface, a quiet revolution was taking place. The decision had been made. The contract of obligation was void. That night, after the last guest had departed and the fairy lights cast a soft glow on the remnants of the celebration, Michael and I sat together on the porch swing. He held my hand, waiting for me to speak. "There's something I've never told anyone," I began, my voice quiet but firm. "Not you, not Sarah, not even my therapist. It's about Mark and me, and a project we started years ago." And for the first time, I told him the whole story of Innovate.io. It started in our garage, like all the tech cliches. Mark was the visionary, the coding genius who could build entire worlds from lines of text. I was the designer, the strategist, the one who took his brilliant but chaotic ideas and gave them form, function, and a marketable brand. We were co-founders, 50 over 50 partners in everything. We filed the incorporation papers on a whim, signing them on our kitchen table. It was our secret dream, our shared baby. We poured every spare dollar and every waking hour into it. After Mark died, I was tempted to let it die with him. The pain was too great. But then I remembered our late-night conversations, his eyes burning with excitement as he talked about its potential. Continuing the project became my way of keeping his spirit alive. I knew I couldn't run it alone, so I used a small inheritance from my grandmother to hire a CEO, a sharp, driven woman named Alana who saw the genius in Mark's code. I never told Eleanor or Sophia about it. To them, my work was just Clara's little computer hobby. They'd see me working late and make condescending comments like, "Still playing on your laptop, dear?" They never took it seriously, so I never bothered to explain. For 5 years, while I was paying their bills and managing their lives, Alana and I were quietly building a giant. Innovate.io software, a unique data compression algorithm, became indispensable in the logistics industry. The company grew exponentially. And then, 3 months ago, the offer came an acquisition from a major tech conglomerate, a number so large it felt like a typo. After lawyers, taxes, and fees, my 50% stake as the sole surviving founder was worth $10,247,000. The money had been sitting in a high-yield investment account, managed by a team of professionals, while I tried to figure out what my new life looked like. Michael listened in stunned silence, his eyes wide. He wasn't shocked by the money, but by the weight of the secret I had carried alone for so long. "Clara, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want the money to define me," I confessed. And honestly, I felt guilty. It felt like blood money, like something I only had because Mark was gone. And I knew if Eleanor and Sophia found out, they would see it as their own. It was easier to just keep being the person they expected me to be. "Oh, they have no idea," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face as the implications dawned on him. "They tried to ruin your engagement party to keep control of their dependent caretaker, and all along you've been one of the wealthiest people they've ever met." The irony was staggering. "They have no idea," I confirmed. "But they're about to find out." The next morning, I didn't feel grief. I felt purpose. I called David Chen, the corporate attorney who had handled the acquisition. David was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in his 50s who had developed a protective, almost fatherly attitude toward me during the stressful negotiation process. I laid out the entire 5-year saga, from the unspoken promise at the funeral to the boycott of my engagement party. He was silent for a long moment after I finished, and when he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Clara, what they have done constitutes years of emotional and financial abuse. Their sense of entitlement is staggering. We are not just going to stop this, we are going to end it, definitively and legally." We spent the next week assembling what David called our arsenal. It was a meticulous and empowering process. First, we gathered the financial records, bank statements from the last 5 years showing every mortgage payment I had made on the house, every credit card bill of theirs I had paid, every large cash transfer to Sophia. The total was astronomical, well over $200,000. Next, David pulled the property deed. The house was in my name and Mark's name as joint tenants with right of survivorship. This was the kill shot. It meant that, upon his death, I automatically became the sole legal owner of the property. Their living there for 5 years had been at my discretion, not their right. Finally, David drafted the legal documents. A formal cease and desist letter demanding they stop all contact and harassment. A detailed accounting of the money I had provided which nullified any imagined debt of gratitude. And a formal, ironclad eviction notice. It gave them 30 days to vacate my property. As I signed the papers in his polished downtown office, I felt a tremor in my hand, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer, unadulterated power of taking back my life. Eleanor and Sophia thought they held all the cards because they lived in Mark's house and held his memory hostage. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of my guilt and their entitlement. They were about to discover that foundation was made of sand, and a tidal wave was coming. The stage for the final confrontation was the living room of the house I had once shared with Mark, the same room where Eleanor had lectured me about my cooking, where Sophia had cried crocodile tears to get money for a new phone. I chose it deliberately. I wanted them to be surrounded by the life they had taken for granted, the life I had single-handedly funded when their world came crashing down. I called Eleanor the day after meeting with my lawyer. My voice was calm, businesslike, and completely devoid of the pleading warmth she was used to. "Eleanor," I said, "we need to have a serious discussion about the future of the house and the financial arrangements between us. I'd like you and Sophia to meet me there tomorrow at 10 a.m. My financial advisor will be present to help facilitate." The mention of a financial advisor was a calculated move. As I expected, she immediately assumed the worst for me. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescending concern. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Clara? Of course, we'll be there. We'll help you sort through whatever mess you've made." They were walking into an ambush, convinced they were on a rescue mission. They arrived at 10 on the dot, striding in with an air of smug authority. Sophia was already looking around the room, probably making a mental list of things she wanted me to buy next. They saw me sitting on the sofa, and next to me, my advisor, my lawyer, David Chen, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, a leather briefcase at his feet. "Clara, so good of you to call this meeting," Eleanor began, taking a seat opposite me without being invited. "Sophia and I were just saying how worried we've been. Your little party." It was clearly a cry for help. "We know you're not managing well on your own." I let her finish. I let them both settle in, confident in their power, secure in their roles as my long-suffering keepers. I looked from Eleanor's patronizing face to Sophia's bored, entitled expression. The anger I felt was cold and clean. "Thank you for coming," I started, my voice even. "I called this meeting because you are right. Things cannot continue as they are. For 5 years, I have honored what I believed was my promise to Mark. I have paid every bill for this house. I have covered your expenses, funded your whims, and put my own life, my own happiness, on hold to ensure your comfort. In return, you have treated me not as family, but as an employee you hold in contempt. Your decision to boycott my engagement party was the end of that arrangement." Eleanor started to interrupt, her usual "you're being hysterical" line already forming on her lips. I held up a hand, and the authority in the gesture stopped her cold. "I'm not finished." David opened his briefcase. "You both seem to be operating under a series of fundamental misconceptions," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "The first is that this is Mark's house. It is not." David slid a copy of the deed across the coffee table. "As you can see," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "the property was held in joint tenancy. Upon Mr. Henderson's death, Miss Peterson became, by law, the sole and undisputed owner of this property. Your residency here has been at her sole discretion." Their faces registered confusion, then dawning horror. Sophia snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it frantically. But Mark paid the down payment." "We both did," I corrected her. "And I have paid every single mortgage payment since his death. Which brings me to your second misconception, that I am financially unstable." This was the moment. I reached into my own folder and pulled out the one-page summary of the acquisition of Innovate.io. I placed it on the table on top of the deed. "You may remember Mark and me working on a small project in the garage. You called it my little computer hobby. That hobby was a tech startup called Innovate.io. We were 50 over 50 co-founders. 3 months ago, the company was sold to a multinational corporation. After taxes, my personal net worth is now in excess of $10 million. And so, the silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Eleanor's jaw had literally dropped. Sophia's face was a comical mask of disbelief, her eyes darting from the paper to my face and back again. The gears were turning, the shock giving way to a frantic, desperate greed. "Mark's company?" Sophia stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "If it was Mark's company, then half of that money belongs to us. We're his family." This was the final, most satisfying blow. I looked her dead in the eye. "No," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "It doesn't. According to Mark's actual, legally binding will, which David has a copy of, he left his entire estate, including his half of the company, to me. Furthermore, our founders' agreement, which we signed with our incorporation papers, included a survivorship clause. In the event of one founder's death, their shares are automatically absorbed by the surviving founder. It is all mine, Sophia. Every last penny. Legally, ethically, and morally." Eleanor finally found her voice, a choked whisper. You lied to us." "No," I said, standing up, feeling a towering sense of release. "I just stopped allowing you to live in your own delusion. I owed Mark my love, and I gave it to him completely. I owe you nothing." David then slid the final document across the table. The eviction notice. "As the sole owner of this property, miss, Peterson is terminating your tenancy," he stated calmly. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Any attempt to remain on the property after that date will be met with legal action." I looked at them one last time. These two women who had been the architects of my misery for 5 years. They were pale, trembling, their faces a mixture of rage and utter devastation. They were sitting in a living room filled with furniture I had paid for, in a house I owned, holding a piece of paper that told them their free ride was over. "You chose to boycott my future," I said, walking toward the door. "So you are no longer welcome in my present. Goodbye, Eleanor. Goodbye, Sophia." And with that, I walked out, leaving my lawyer to handle the details. The silence in that room, as I closed the front door behind me, was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was the sound of my freedom, finally, beginning. Walking away from that house, leaving them with the shattered pieces of their delusion, felt less like a dramatic explosion and more like a quiet, profound release. I didn't feel vengeful or even triumphant. I simply felt light. The crushing weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried for 5 years, had vanished. The 30 days that followed were a strange limbo. The phone calls and text messages started within hours. They came in predictable waves. First came the disbelief and rage. Voicemails from Eleanor screaming that I was a heartless, conniving snake. Texts from Sophia filled with curses and threats to tell everyone what you've done. I didn't respond. I forwarded the most threatening ones to David and blocked their numbers. Then came the second wave, bargaining and manipulation. The messages were suddenly sweet, filled with feigned remorse. "Clara, darling, we were just upset. We didn't mean it. Let's talk this over like a family," one of Eleanor's texts read. Sophia tried a different tactic. "I know we've had our differences, but think of Mark. He would never want his family to be homeless." They were using the same old weapons, but for the first time, they had no power over me. Their words were just noise. The final wave was pathetic, desperate pleading. As the deadline approached, the messages became frantic. They had nowhere to go. They had no money. How could I do this to them? But my well of sympathy had run dry. Their predicament was the direct result of their own actions. While they were spiraling, Michael and I were building. We decided to sell the Craftsman house immediately. It was a beautiful home, but it was haunted by the ghosts of my past life, by the memory of their entitlement. I wanted a clean slate. With the help of a fantastic real estate agent, we found a stunning modern house perched on a hill overlooking the city, with glass walls and an open floor plan that felt like the physical manifestation of my newfound freedom. We put in a cash offer, and it was accepted within a day. The most important step I took, however, had nothing to do with houses or money. I established the Mark Henderson Innovation Grant, a charitable foundation funded with an initial endowment of $2 million. The foundation's sole purpose was to provide seed, money, and mentorship to young, underprivileged tech entrepreneurs, people like Mark, who had brilliant ideas but lacked the resources to bring them to life. It was a way to honor his true legacy, not by subsidizing his family's laziness, but by fueling the same kind of passion and creativity he had embodied. On the 30th day, the day they were legally required to be out, I received a notification from my lawyer. A moving van had arrived at the house that morning, They were gone. The locks were changed, and the keys were in my possession. I never went back inside. I hired a company to clear out whatever they had left behind and prepare the house for sale. I heard through the family grapevine, from a cousin who had called to offer her support, that Eleanor and Sophia had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a less than desirable part of town. Sophia, for the first time in her adult life, had been forced to get a full-time job in retail. Eleanor was reportedly miserable, complaining constantly to anyone who would listen about how I had stolen her son's legacy and thrown them out onto the street. Their attempts to poison the family against me backfired spectacularly. When the truth emerged not just about their behavior, but about the sheer scale of my long-term financial support and the existence of the foundation I'd created in Mark's name, the narrative shifted. I wasn't the villain. I was the victim who had finally found her voice. The support that had once been theirs now flowed to me. The first night Michael and I spent in our new home, we ordered takeout and ate it on the floor, surrounded by boxes. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering panorama of city lights. There were no passive-aggressive sighs from the other room, no lists of demands on the kitchen counter. There was just peace. A profound, blissful, and utterly unfamiliar peace. "How do you feel?" Michael asked, his voice soft in the quiet of the room. I considered the question. "I feel like I can finally breathe," I said. I had thought that cutting them off, taking back my life so forcefully, would be the hardest, most gut-wrenching thing I'd ever have to do. I was wrong. It was the easiest. The real challenge, I realized, wasn't leaving the past behind. It was learning how to embrace a future that was, for the first time, completely and utterly my own. 1 year can feel like a lifetime. The person I was on the day of my engagement party felt like a stranger from a distant past. A woman I could feel compassion for, but no longer recognized in the mirror. 12 months after the reckoning, my life had been completely and beautifully remade. Michael and I were married in a small, intimate ceremony on the deck of our new home, overlooking the city. It was the antithesis of the grand, stressful party I had tried to plan before. This was for us. Our vows were witnessed by the small circle of friends who had been my true family all along. There was no drama, no guilt, no obligation, only joy. My life, once a narrow path dictated by the needs of others, had opened up into a vast, breathtaking landscape of possibilities. The Mark Henderson Innovation Grant had become my passion. In its first year, we funded 3 different startups founded by bright, ambitious young people from disadvantaged communities. One was developing an app to help non-English speakers access legal aid. Another was creating low-cost water purification systems for rural areas. I sat on the board, offering not just financial support but also the branding and design expertise I had honed over the years. I saw Mark's spirit in their enthusiasm, in their relentless drive to solve problems. This, I knew, was the legacy he would have been proud of. I wasn't just managing wealth, I was cultivating dreams. My personal life was just as rich. I had reconnected with my own creativity, setting up a spacious art studio in our new home where I painted and designed, not for clients, but for myself. Michael and I traveled, we hosted dinner parties filled with laughter, and we adopted a scruffy terrier from a local shelter who now ruled the house. I had discovered that a life filled with peace was not a boring life. It was a life where you finally had the energy to truly live. The story of Eleanor and Sophia unfolded from a distance, relayed in snippets from concerned relatives. Their new life was a harsh education in reality. Without my financial cushion, they struggled. The cramped apartment felt like a prison after the spacious house they had taken for granted. Sophia, unused to the rigors of a 9-to-5 job, was fired from her retail position after just a few months. Eleanor's health declined, brought on by stress and a poor diet they could now barely afford. They had spent years believing they were entitled to a life of comfort, only to discover that comfort had been a privilege extended by my kindness, not a right bestowed by their name. Then, about 8 months after the eviction, something unexpected happened. I received an email with a simple subject line, an apology. It was from Sophia. I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was long, rambling, and shockingly honest. She wrote that being forced to stand on her own 2 feet had been the most humiliating and ultimately clarifying experience of her life. She had started seeing a therapist, a condition of a new job she'd found as a receptionist. For the first time, she was forced to confront her own behavior, her sense of entitlement, and the deep-seated jealousy she had always felt toward me, first for having Mark's love, and then for having a strength she couldn't understand. "I know sorry isn't enough," she wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I finally see it. We didn't lose our meal ticket that day, Clara. We lost the only person who genuinely tried to be family to us after Mark was gone. I threw that away for money I didn't earn and a house I didn't deserve. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you." She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for anything. It was the first genuine communication I'd had from her in my entire life. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit for a week, discussing it with Michael and my therapist. The old Clara would have rushed in, eager to fix things. The new Clara understood the importance of boundaries. I eventually wrote back a short, polite email. "Thank you for your apology, Sophia. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I wish you well on your journey." It was not an invitation back into my life, but it was an acknowledgement of her effort. It was a door left slightly ajar, not wide open. A few months later, on the anniversary of Mark's death, I went to visit his grave alone. As I was laying down fresh flowers, I saw Eleanor there, sitting on a nearby bench. She looked older, frailer. She saw me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old resentment in her eyes. But then it softened, replaced by a profound weariness. "We didn't speak for a long time. Finally," she said, her voice raspy. "The foundation. What you're doing for those kids. That's him. That's the boy I raised." It was the closest she would ever get to an admission of her own wrongdoing, a tacit acknowledgement that my way of honoring him was truer than hers. "Yes, it is," I said softly. We sat in silence for another 10 minutes before she stood up and walked away. There was no hug, no dramatic reconciliation, but there was a flicker of something new in the space between us. A shared, painful understanding. Our relationship would never be warm, but perhaps it no longer needed to be hostile. Looking at Sophia's email and remembering that quiet moment with Eleanor, I realized the profound truth of what had happened. By forcibly removing my support, I hadn't just saved myself. I had inadvertently given them the one thing they desperately needed but never would have sought on their own: the opportunity to grow. My refusal to be their safety net had forced them to learn how to stand, however wobbly, on their own 2 feet. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about punishment. It was about the natural, unavoidable consequences of one's own choices. As I look back on the tumultuous journey that brought me here, to this life filled with love, purpose, and a quiet foundational peace, I realize the most valuable thing I gained had nothing to do with the $10 million in my bank account. The money was a powerful tool, certainly a catalyst that gave me the leverage to act decisively and without fear of financial ruin. But the true windfall, the real, life-altering inheritance, was the lesson I was forced to learn about my own intrinsic worth, a truth that had been buried for years under the suffocating weight of obligation and a misplaced sense of duty. For so long, I had allowed my value to be defined entirely by my utility to others. I was a good fiancé, a loyal partner, a talented designer, a devoted caretaker. My worth was an external commodity, measured by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice, and how seamlessly I could anticipate and meet the needs of those around me. This was a quiet, insidious erosion of self. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in 1,000 tiny concessions, a million silent negotiations where I chose their comfort over my own peace. I had convinced myself that this was the very definition of love. I believed this was what family meant. Unconsciously, I had constructed the entire architecture of my life upon a deeply flawed blueprint, the belief that my loyalty was a debt I owed, a tax on my happiness rather than a gift to be earned and cherished in return. The foundation of this old structure was poured with my own guilt. The mortar binding the bricks was their unyielding sense of entitlement. And the high, suffocating walls that boxed me in were built from my fear of their disapproval and my terror of being truly alone. I policed my own joy, dimming my own light so as not to make them feel uncomfortable in its glare. The day Eleanor and Sophia chose to boycott my engagement party, they didn't just break a social contract, they took a sledgehammer to that entire rotten foundation. Their final, calculated act of cruelty was the tremor that brought the whole corroded structure crashing down around me. In the dust and ruin of that collapse, in the deafening silence of their absence, I was forced to see the unvarnished truth with a brutal and beautiful clarity. They didn't love me for who I was, but for what I did for them. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a function, an endlessly renewable resource that had suddenly declared its independence. True family, the kind of profound, unconditional connection I have now with Michael and our incredible circle of friends, doesn't come with a hidden ledger of debts and obligations. It doesn't hand you an itemized bill for its affection. True family shows up. It celebrates your joy as if it were its own. It soothes your sorrow without judgment, and it honors your boundaries as the sacred lines that define a healthy, respectful love. The greatest and most painful irony is that by clinging to Mark's memory in the way they demanded, I was actually dishonoring the very man they claimed to be protecting. Their version of honor was to build a mausoleum of memory, a cold, stagnant monument to the past where we were all meant to live in perpetual twilight. They wanted me to be its eternal caretaker. But Mark fell in love with a vibrant, creative woman who laughed freely and dreamed in bold colors. For 5 long years after his death, I wasn't that person. I was a ghost. The foundation, the grants, the act of using our shared dream to fuel the new dreams of others, that is how I truly honor him. By creating a living legacy, not a static memorial. By living fully, by loving fiercely, by creating beauty and opportunity in the world. Mark would never have wanted the memory of his love to become a gilded cage that trapped me. He would have wanted it to be the key that set me free. My secret fortune didn't save me. It empowered me to save myself. The financial independence was the tool, but the emotional independence was the true prize. It gave me the leverage to tear down that emotional prison and build a new architecture of worth in its place. But the strength, the resolve, the courage to swing the first hammer that was inside me all along. It had been dormant, buried under years of telling myself to be smaller, to be quieter, to put others first. I just needed to finally believe I deserved to use that strength for my own sake. I had to learn to become the protagonist of my own story, instead of remaining a supporting character in theirs. And that's the lesson I hope to share with all of you. Your worth is non-negotiable. It is not conditional upon someone else's approval. It is not determined by how much you can give to people who are unwilling to give back. It is your birthright. You are not an obligation to be fulfilled or a resource to be drained. You are a life to be lived. Learning to set boundaries, especially with family, is not an act of aggression. It is an act of profound self-respect. It is the brave and necessary process of teaching people how you deserve to be treated. It is not a one-time declaration, but a continuous practice of choosing yourself. It may be one of the most terrifying and liberating acts a person can undertake, but it is the first, essential step toward building a life of authentic peace. So now, I want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own happiness and the expectations of your family? What was that one moment, that final straw, that made you realize you had to draw a line in the sand for your own well-being? I would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. There is so much strength and wisdom in our shared experiences, and we can all learn from each other's courage. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more true stories about finding your power, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is never selfish to build a life where you feel valued, respected, and finally, truly free. Thank you for listening. And always remember, the most important and magnificent project you will ever build is a life that you are proud to call your own.